Wii U was known for having some of the worst games in history. And yeah, just look, there were a ton of bad games on this console. But one that gets the most hate on this platform isn't even from Nintendo themselves. And to many people, it's the #1 worst game of them all. And I'm talking about Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric. Sonic has gone through various changes throughout the series' life, and there's a lot of lost media tied to this blue hedgehog, like many canceled games or even old cartoons. But honestly, I think one of the goofiest eras of Sonic was back in 2014 when Sonic was given a brown scarf, bandages around his arms and legs, and an echidna who had apparently taken too many steroids. That's right, the Sonic Boom era is one that's hard to forget, while also somehow being one of the most forgotten. SEGA has now fully backpedaled on these versions of the characters in their newer titles, but should they have? Well, to figure that out, I forced myself to play through the entirety of Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric in one sitting. I'm serious, I did that. Yes, this version of the game was only available on the Wii U, because at the time, Nintendo had done a little exclusive deal to put their games just on Nintendo platforms. Now, around the same time of the Wii U's release, they also dropped another version called Sonic Boom: Shattered Crystals on 3DS. And a couple years later, they followed it up with another 3DS game called Sonic Boom: Fire and Ice. And if this video does well, I might play those games too. So, subscribe. Regardless, in this video, we're focusing on the Wii U game because it's notoriously broken. So broken, in fact, that it scored a measly 32 on Metacritic and is widely regarded as the worst game on Wii U. Naturally, I've decided to put that reputation to the test. Booting it up, I gotta say, just in the menu, the music is great, so this has gotta be good, right? The game gives us options like story mode and team challenges, introducing modes like Arena, which allow up to 4 players to play at once. But the most fascinating addition is the 3DS Connect mode, where you can snag items from linking the 3DS version of the game to the Wii U. This is kind of a weird feature that wasn't super common, except for Smash Bros on the Wii U where you could connect a 3DS as a controller. It's honestly bizarre that the obscure Sonic game has such a feature like this, but okay. Cool, let's actually start playing the game. Jumping into the story mode, you're greeted with a cutscene where Sonic gets cooked, and then the text "yesterday" flashes on screen. That's right, this game starts off with a cliffhanger. I'm so intrigued now. I wonder what happened. The next shot shows Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Knuckles chasing Eggman. During the chase, they get split up, regroup at some ancient ruins, and stumble upon carvings of Sonic on the walls. Then Eggman shows up with his robots, and Sonic, being the genius we all know and love, decides to open a mysterious door, drag everyone inside, and lock it behind them. Inside, they accidentally release Lyric, a snake-like robot who's been imprisoned for 1,000 years. Somehow, Lyric immediately recognizes Sonic and Tails, which is super weird considering the whole 1,000-year thing, traps them, and then rambles on about how he's the villain. And he escapes to destroy the world. Eventually, the gang breaks free, meets a guy named Cliff, and learns Lyric's backstory. Turns out Lyric wants to replace all living things with machines. Now that he's free, it's up to Sonic and the gang to stop him from collecting 8 crystals before he can use them to power his machine. And that's it. That's the entire point of the story. Traverse through levels, find 8 crystals, and save the world from Lyric. And remember that cliffhanger that I talked about? I'll talk about that later, so just stick around. My first thoughts was that I was genuinely impressed. I think the art style and the overall movement of the characters are fantastic. I remember not loving the Sonic look as a kid, though back then I didn't like Sonic being canonically changed, and let's be real, I also thought Knuckles was a little smarter than they made him out to be. But looking at it today, I actually like most of the personality changes and designs. Okay, Knuckles is still a bit goofy, but his design emphasizes his strength more than ever before, so I kind of respect it. Now about the movement, this was really different. The characters all felt super cartoony and fluid, which I think worked really well for the tone of the game. And there was also unique fighting styles for each character, which honestly was pretty cool. Limited, but cool. Now before we get even deeper into this game, I have to mention the performance. It's atrocious. We'll talk about that in a bit because I got a lot to say about that. The game alternates between 3D platforming puzzle solving sections and high-speed chases where you're dodging obstacles and rope swinging across canyons and massive environments. I think these two gameplay styles work really well together, especially in a game that's so heavily co-op themed, because yes, this game is co-op, but I'll get back to that again. Unlike the fast-paced Sonic games that have you blasting through levels as quickly as possible, this one forces you to slow down. You spend time solving puzzles and platforming, with each character's special gimmicks taking center stage. Knuckles can wall climb, Amy shows off her epic parkour skills with her triple jump and hammer, Tails has his gadgets, and Sonic, well, he's Sonic. He spin dashes and goes fast, and that's about all he needs to do. Each character feels equally useful in different parts of the game, which make them all feel necessary to experience. Their personalities also mesh really well together. In my opinion, opinion, creating a really great cartoony chemistry you'd expect from a Sonic cast such as this. Again, it's not always perfect, like how they made Knuckles as smart as me, and you know, how often they talk throughout the gameplay, but it's better that they have personality than no personality at all. Looking back, I think I'm more intrigued by this version of the game now than I was back in the day. When I was a kid, I was scared they'd stay this way forever. Now I can appreciate the experiment for what it was. Throughout the game, you'd encounter enemies, and each character had their own moveset to show off their strengths. Knuckles is a big guy who dives straight into hand-to-hand combat. Amy uses her iconic massive hammer to smash enemies into powder and then sniff it. Tails once again relies on his gadgets because he's the sly fox he is and works more as a range fighter. And Sonic, well, once again, he's fast. But he also has the coolest fighting style around. He's got the flashy kicks and the satisfying homing attack. I was honestly surprised to see that every character had distinct movesets. It was pretty satisfying and cool to pull off combos, and at first, it was genuinely fun switching between characters to beat up enemies. It keeps things fresh by encouraging you to swap between them all during the fights. But as it turns out, there is such a thing as too much fighting, because the biggest issue about the combat is that a lot of levels are padded out with mediocre enemy encounters. For the first hour, the combat was engaging enough, but after that, it starts to feel like a chore. Eventually, we figured out it was faster and much less repetitive just to use our laser beam ropes to grab enemies and toss them off stage. Work smarter, not harder. And speaking of laser beams, this is a core gameplay element in this game, and something that hasn't been seen in any other Sonic game since, from what I can remember. The beam was primarily used for swinging or cutting through specific parts of the high-speed sections. Normally, you'd get a short window to grab a rail with the beam, and if you missed, you'd be stuck scrambling to get back on track. It's a good idea in single-player mode, but in co-op, it's the worst when one player is left behind, completely unable to finish the course. The laser beam is also used to solve a lot of puzzles. A lot of puzzles. Like literally most of the puzzles. Which is fine, I guess. You usually just grab something with it and then pull it to unlock whatever. Here's some gameplay. That's what I'm talking about. But they were also used in a lot of the boss battles, and nearly every single one of them follows the same formula. Grab an item, throw it at the boss, and then use the beam to pull the boss down, and then fight the boss when it's down. It's repetitive, and I feel like they could have incorporated these beams a little more into combat. That said, I didn't really mind the addition of the beams. In fact, I like how different it was from previous games. While it definitely had more potential, I wasn't thinking about it too much while I was actually playing. I was just rolling with it. Collectibles are another thing that exists in this game. There's crowns. I'll be honest, while I was playing through it, I didn't really care about them that much. There's also scrap metal parts which can be used to open up and expand the overworld map. These weren't necessary to complete the game, so I didn't really bother with them. I just didn't care. But that said, I'm happy they're here for the completionists out there. Oh, and speaking of extras, there are also character upgrades. These do things like increase attack power and a bunch of other stuff, but I'm not gonna lie, I completely forgot that this was even a thing. I maybe touched them once throughout the entire playthrough and then forgot about them for the rest of the time. Oh, and by the way, this is what you unlock when you connect the 3DS version to the game. Once again, not that big of a deal, I just forgot about them. And speaking of collecting, there's also the classic Sonic rings. Oh, except the thing about this is that there's not really any point to them. It's exactly like you remember. You collect the rings throughout the levels, and if you get hit, you lose them and panic to pick them up before moving on. Except here, you only lose a tiny amount of rings at a time, which makes the risk of diving headfirst into battles pretty much non-existent. This lack of risk makes an already simple game even easier, and that's a big complaint from some players that I saw. Yes, the game was overall pretty easy, but I didn't mind cramming through it. Now, a big part of this game, more than I realized before even jumping in, is the co-op play. If you're going to try this game out, it's essential to play with someone else. The first thing I absolutely love about co-op play is that it actually uses the gamepad. That's right, no annoying split screen. Instead, one player is on the gamepad and the other one is on the TV. Let's go! This was such a great use of the gamepad, and honestly, I wish more split screen games on the Wii U had done this. Minecraft Wii U, I'm looking at you. The reason I say co-op play is a must is because the entire game is built around it. Pretty much every puzzle requires 2 players to solve. Well, kind of. The game is designed for co-op, but if you don't have someone to play with, you're stuck with an NPC, or it just takes you longer to get through the puzzle because you gotta do 2 instead of just 1. Now, to be fair, the co-op gameplay wasn't perfect, like that one time where we were doing a boat mission. Player 1 got to control all characters, weapons, and the boat itself, while player 2 was left with this stupid little gun that felt like it was straight out of Mario Galaxy Player 2 mode. Like, player 2 wasn't even helping. Anyways, I played this whole game with my brother, and we both really enjoyed the co-op aspect, aside from one major thing, which brings me to my next point, the graphics and performance. Yeah, we might be here for a while because I got a lot to say about this topic. As I'm sure you've noticed, the game doesn't exactly run smoothly. There are 3 major points that I want to talk about when it comes to the game's polish: graphics, performance, and literally the overall brokenness of it. First, the graphics. Let's start by remembering that this is on the Wii U, so we can't expect it to look that good, and it doesn't. but all things considered, it looks fine for what it is. The gameplay resolution seems to hover around 720p, which makes sense, and I'm not complaining about that. I actually really like the design of many of the environments, and as we've discussed, even the characters. The art style feels like it's a good fit for what the game is trying to achieve and what the hardware can handle. The problem with the graphics isn't noticeable in single player. It's in the multiplayer where things take a nosedive. The graphics get heavily downgraded. From what I can tell, the biggest change is the removal of dynamic lighting, basically the moving shadows throughout the game. That might not sound like a big deal, but after doing some side-by-side comparisons, the difference is massive. Seriously, just look at how much worse this looks. But co-op doesn't just impact the graphics, it also completely affects the performance. This was probably the worst part of the game as a whole, and it was by far the biggest complaint I found while doing my research, and playing it in general. And yeah, I completely get it. No, your viewing device isn't broken, and no, my recording device isn't either. This is genuinely just how bad the game runs. The game is not optimized for Wii U whatsoever. You can easily tell by watching my gameplay that there wasn't a single moment during my entire playthrough where the game hit a stable 30 frames per second. And once again, co-op is the game's biggest challenge. Even in basic levels with minimal assets, the console feels like it's dying inside. I eventually got used to the performance and managed to make it through, but if I hadn't known this ahead of time, or if I got a game that performed this bad today, I would have been absolutely enraged. A game should never run this poorly, especially one from such a big series, like Sonic. It's a great way to lose trust in all future Sonic enjoyers. What really blows my mind is that they just left it like this. Co-op is such a huge part of the gameplay's joy, and the entire design of the levels revolves around it. But the performance is so bad, it makes the game feel horrible to play. It's not quite as bad in single player mode, but the issues are still there no matter what you do. Anytime you fight enemies, the game chugs. Anytime you're in a high speed section, the Wii U simply can't keep up, and it looks completely broken. So that's gotta be the worst part of the game, right? No. I hope you're liking this video so far, and by the way, if you are, you can be more involved in them. By becoming a member, you can get your name featured at the end of every single video permanently, access to behind-the-scenes exclusive content, and even join me when I play games on live streams. It's a great way to support the channel and be part of the community. Also, you get an exclusive Discord chat where I'm active and you can talk to me. So please click the join button or hit the first link in the description to become a Vandy. Back to the video. Now we need to talk about the brokenness of it all. Just how unpolished this game really is, because it's potentially the most broken game I've ever played. Let's talk about a few things I saw. These high-speed sections are a big part of the game, but unfortunately, the camera just can't keep up. This usually results in the camera constantly clipping through walls or falling behind entirely. It's also incredibly jarring because you can't even tell what's happening on the screen, or how to react to an obstacle or tether ramp for your laser beam. Speaking of these high-speed sections, there were just a few times when the characters would just clip through the floor, or heck, get launched completely through mountains and terrain. I was so confused. At least it was hilarious. And then there's the infamous Knuckles infinite jump. If you double jump and pause the game, Knuckles can jump again after unpausing, which lets you gain infinite height. Yeah, this is a thing, and a huge hack in the speedrunning community. Oh, and let's not forget about this gem of a glitch in the open world map during two-player mode. Both players would just randomly clip into each other, making it impossible to move. I think this happened because there's some kind of limit to how far apart the two players can be in certain sections of the map. If you try to go beyond that limit, the game freaks out and forces you to stay extremely close together. And during a lot of the cutscenes, the game glitches whenever the camera cuts to another shot. There was even this one time when the sound just randomly started echoing itself. Like, why did this even happen? But I think some of the most frustrating moments involved Metal Sonic. He's here to help Eggman take on the four main characters, and honestly, I don't have an issue with Metal Sonic story-wise. But gameplay-wise, oh boy, yikes. His fight requires you to continuously run after him and deflect objects back at him to take him down. That's fine. In fact, I actually like this part of the game. The gameplay here is intense, and it could have been a lot of fun if it worked. Instead, this section was borderline unplayable. If player 2 got hit or died, they just wouldn't spawn back in, and the camera would be locked here indefinitely. This happened constantly because the frame rate during this section was abysmally slow, making it nearly impossible to react properly. The only way to fix this was for the TV player to exit the game completely and spawn back to where the gamepad player was. And it's not just Metal Sonic's fight where this happens. Pretty much anytime there's a high-speed chase or something pursuing you, if the TV player dies, they don't respawn. The camera locks in their position, and that's it, you're stuck. It's so frustrating in the moment, especially because you want to enjoy these epic scenes. As a kid, this would have been absolutely devastating for me, not being able to play such a cool sequence. But now, I can't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. So yes, that's how broken it is. Now, I did completely beat the game, so it's not broken to the point where it's unbeatable, but you can tell the polish just wasn't there, and this was not something that they prioritized at all. But let's circle back to the story. Spoilers, I guess. This is a 11-year-old game, so you've had plenty of time. Shadow is here, and he's here for no reason at all. They didn't really even introduce him. I don't know what he's doing. He doesn't really have any major role in the plot and feels completely shoehorned in for no good reason. At one point, Shadow just shows up to declare that Sonic is too weak for him, which of course leads to a fight. Afterward, he just disappears. Then at the end of the game, he randomly shows up again, says good job, and then vanishes like he's got better things to do. There's absolutely no reason for him to be here. And don't get me started on his performance and character design. Both feel like an afterthought. They didn't do much to his design or proportions nearly as much as any of the other characters in this game did. They just kind of threw him in last minute and said, hey look, it's Shadow. Oh, and remember that whole dramatic beginning where, you know, Sonic dies and then they foreshadow it? Yeah, turns out after Sonic is crushed by all these rocks, he just gets up like nothing happened. Why even foreshadow this if it means literally nothing? Now, I think a huge part of the criticisms of this game from reviewers weren't even from how broken it was or the performance, it was the gameplay. So I'm gonna go over some reviews and just debunk some of what they're saying. First of all, the pacing of the game. Some people claimed it was very slow paced. I have to disagree. I don't think it was slow paced at all. The story wasn't the most interesting thing ever, but it didn't drag. Gameplay wise, I wouldn't call it slow paced either. In fact, they introduced a decent variety of gameplay elements that kept things entertaining. Take the laser whip, for example. It added a whole new way to interact with environments, solve puzzles, and even made the fast paced sections a little more engaging, letting you find shortcuts to get through them faster. And then there's the water sections where Sonic and Tails can run so fast they literally zoom across the water. This wasn't an overused mechanic either. They used it sparingly and in really cool ways that actually made the story feel more exciting. Then there was the whole argument that this game was too childish. And listen, I love my Marios, I love my Pokemons, and I love my Sonics. And while most of the time these games do a great job at making people of all ages feel like they're playing something for everyone, sometimes it's harder to strike that balance, especially with a personality as strong as Sonic's and the whole Sonic cast. And let's not forget, this game is a prequel to a children's cartoon. If anything, the new Sonic movie has way more childish elements than even this one. So saying that this game is too childish is just wrong. Remember what we're playing here, people. A blue talking hedgehog, come on. The overall concept of this game is genuinely intriguing. I love how they made use of the local co-op and built so much of the gameplay around it. I played this with my brother and we both went into it knowing how broken it was. That actually made it surprisingly fun. When the game did something well, it felt like a pleasant surprise. And when it did something bad, it was just funny bad. Oh no. Honestly, I don't think it's the core of the game that makes it bad. It's the lack of polish. I didn't have any real issue with most of the core gameplay mechanics. Sure, there were frustrating moments, like the lack of direction in certain areas and the so bad it's good plotline, but overall, I actually enjoyed the gameplay for what it was, especially for the length of the game. I beat the whole thing with my brother in like 5 hours. If the game had gone for twice as long, then yeah, it would have become incredibly repetitive, straight up boring, and just plain frustrating. But at about 5 hours or so, it was bearable and honestly kind of funny for what it was. Again, knowing these flaws going in. Now, the game was pretty easy overall, but sometimes it's fun to just sit back and enjoy a simple game, and that's exactly how I looked at it. So what are my final thoughts on Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric? It's a mess. A hilariously broken, poorly optimized mess, but at the same time, it's kind of a mess that you can't help but be fascinated by. The game's core concept isn't inherently bad. In fact, there are some genuinely intriguing ideas here. The co-op gameplay, the character-specific abilities, and even some of the environmental puzzles, pretty fun. From the choppy frame rate to the janky camera to the bizarre glitches and lack of polish, it's clear this game was rushed out the door faster than Sonic himself, and yet there's something oddly charming about how spectacularly it fails. Once again, it's so bad it's good. Would I recommend it? Well, honestly, yeah. If you've got a friend or a sibling to play this with, and you're in the mood for a game that's equal parts frustrating and unintentionally hilarious, this might be worth your time, especially if you're a diehard Sonic fan and you haven't played this yet. Sonic Boom might be infamous for being one of the worst games on Wii U, but it's also fantastic to look back at an era when Sonic tried to reinvent the blue blur in the most bizarre way possible. For better or worse, it's a game that's hard to forget, and honestly, that's kind of impressive in its own right. So I actually really like this game, and if that hurts my credibility, I'm sorry. Let me know if you like this single game review and if I should be doing it more often. Once again, consider becoming a channel member to get your name at the end of the video and all those other fun perks. Click this video if you want to see me play every Sonic game on the Nintendo Switch, and consider liking and subscribing. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.